Hi, I'm Dr. Seth Jenny, and today we are going to talk about problems in defining key terms in academic journal articles. This comes from How to Critique Journal Articles in Social Sciences by Harris, 2014. So, in everyday life, people throw out terms, but they do not operationalize them or define them. For example, somebody calls someone else, oh, that person's a heavy drinker. Well, what does that mean exactly? How many drinks does that constitute as heavy drinking? What types of drinks? How often do they drink? So all these things are not thought about when people throw out terms, and then when you ask them to define what they mean, sometimes they struggle to have a type of operational definition. So in academic research articles, peer-reviewed articles, authors try to define those types of terms. In scholarly prose, authors will say how many drinks, what types of drinks, what the alcohol content might be. And these are things that you should be looking for when you're reading journal articles. If you see a term that's put out there, the stronger pieces will operationally define those types of terms. So sometimes authors will neglect to define them at all. Sometimes they will implicitly define them where they might throw the word out and then have a few following sentences which sort of defines it. But then hopefully what you'll find is explicit definition of term. The problem is there's limited space in journal articles, and so it's usually limited to about one sentence, and I want to show you a few examples. So here is a paper called A Case Study of a Successful Men's NCAA Division I Distance Running Coach. To what extent is decision making humanistic? Well, there's a few terms here that I might want to have defined. One would be successful. What is success? That is something that is different to every single person. Another term would be distance running. How exactly are you defining distance running? Because in NCAA Division I, there's either cross country or there's track and field. So how are we defining that? So let me show you an example of the way that success was defined in this particular paper. Let's go to page 8. And this is in the methods section, talking about the participants, and here's talking about the coach. We can see the participant coach, this was a case study on a successful coach, was the current head coach of a successful men's NCAA Division I cross-country running team in the West region of the United States. Success in this study equated to the coach having distance running athletes and teams qualifying for the NCAA National Championships. Again, we will discuss some of the problems with academic definitions, what you might call operationalizing certain terms in papers. But that gives you one example. Close the current tab. In theses or dissertations, where you have a lot more space to write, you can see this is 66 pages, and the title of this thesis is Preferred Coaching Styles in Youth Sports, a Qualitative Inquiry of Soccer Players from Generation Z. So let's go back let's take a look at the table of contents. You can see in the table of contents, they have a section here, excuse me, toward the end here called Research Questions, Limitations, Delimitations, Assumptions, and Definitions. A lot of the orders of theses, dissertations are specific to the institution which grants that degree, and so this particular institution required it at the end in the appendix. It could be up to the dissertation or thesis advisor, but let's go to page 46 and see those. So we're going down to page 46, past it. All right. So limitations are the ways in which the study could have been improved if they were to do that study again. Now, delimitations closely relate to definitions within a study. It is how the study is narrowed in scope. So typically, let's say a delimitation for this is that the study was limited to athletes participating in soccer and youth soccer. So not only was it limited in soccer, but also youth soccer. So those are two specific ways in which it's delimited. So delimitations really relate to definitions, but here the author here lists specific definitions within this paper. They said, what is Generation Z? That might have been a question that you had whenever we saw the title there. Individuals born from 2000 to present. Well, I think this paper I saw was dated 2012. So from 2000 to 2012 is what they consider Generation Z. In an academic journal article, you're not going to see a list of definitions like this. It's going to be closer to that previous example I showed you where it's embedded within the paper. All right, let's look at one more example. Here is another distance running dissertation and a case study of the coaching philosophy of men's NCAA distance running coach. To what extent is it humanistic? And so here's what is distance running. I'm going to show you how an example of a way that distance running was defined. And that is on page 21. Sorry for the scrolling. It's right below the research questions, I believe. All right, sorry about that, found it. So here embedded in this dissertation is a subheading called Definition of Distance Running in this study. And so the term distance running in the study refers to the following men's NCAA sports and events. So these participants in this study were limited to men, so that would be a delimitation. Cross-country running, where competitions are held between 8,000 and 10,000 meter distances. Indoor track and field, the 5,000 meter event, and then outdoor track and field, 5,000 and 10,000 meters. So those are all encompassing of that term distance running in here. I also want to show you page 21 are the delimitations within the study, and so it's not in the appendix for this particular dissertation. It is toward the end of, I believe, chapter 1. All right, so here's the way that this study was narrowed in scope. They had to be coaching, the participants, athletes in this study had to be coaching by that coach for at least 1 year prior. They had to be 18 years of old. They had to restricted to the west region of the United States. So those are all things that help define that particular study. But there's really just not room to have a listing of delimitations in a typical journal article. All right. So one of the problems with defining terms in academic research is the dilemma of infinite regress. What that essentially means is that when you try to define something, you're going to use new words, right? Well, when you define it with those new words, then realistically you need to define what those new words are. And so it's a continuous cycle of, at some point you have to stop defining new terms and words when you're describing something, and that's the dilemma of infinite Regress here. I'm going to show you another example. Here is an example of how different authors in the eSports community of scholarship define eSports. So what are eSports? Well, if we look at Hewitt here, and I apologize for the text a little bit smaller, eSports is the transformation of certain video games into competitive sports. Ferrari, professional computer gaming. Rothman, professional video gaming. So even between those two, so we have professional in both of these. All right, let's look at Jenny. Ooh, yes, yep, that's me. Organized video game competitions. Professional's not in there. Are we talking about online? You'll see online video gaming in some of them. If you're playing on a console such as the PS4, the Xbox, is that considered esports, or does it have to be online? A lot of times that they're online because they're playing other people who are not located in the same location. Weiss, playing competitive games according to generally accepted rules of leagues and tournaments on the internet. That really opens the door. So we can see here, this is a complete listing of what looks to be about 25 different definitions of esports, and they're all from academic peer-reviewed journal articles. So in conclusion, every day when people are talking, they throw out terms, and it's pretty vague, and people don't always define those things. Social scientists in academic research try to define those terms, but you're always going to have issues with the dilemma of infinite regress and authors not always agreeing on those types of definitions and terms. And so when you're critiquing journal articles, take a look at how they're defining those terms and look to see how close and consistent they are to past research and other sources and citations to see how close of it is to being a quality article.